Are you ready to face the harsh reality of death row? Meet Scott James Eizember, a man who claimed his conscience was clear before his lethal injection execution. It all began on October 18, 2003, when Patsy Cantrell, 70, and her husband, AJ Cantrell, 76, were murdered by Scott Eizember in their Depew home. Scott Eizember was a 42-year-old drifter, an alcoholic, an abusive ex-husband, and obsessed over his ex-girlfriend. He grew up in a home ravaged by drug addiction and alcohol abuse. His mother killed herself when he was just 8 months old. His stepmother died of liver disease. After multiple failed marriages, Eizember started dating a woman named Kathy Biggs in 2002, who was recently divorced. It wasn't long before that relationship crumbled. It was in August of 2003 that Biggs invited Eizember to move out of their Tulsa apartment. Eizember was not amused, so he bound her with duct tape and held a knife to her throat. And then he stalked her across the state to Lawton. Later, Eizember discovered Biggs had returned to Tulsa. On September 13, 2003, Biggs accused him of ransacking the apartment they once shared in Tulsa. The prosecution accused him of second-degree burglary, malicious injury to property, and violating a protective order. In October 2003, Eizember was released from jail on bail. On October 17, he failed to appear in court. He was angry that Biggs reported a protective order violation to the police. Biggs's mother lived across the street from AJ and Patsy Cantrell. In the early morning hours of October 18, Eizember broke into the Cantrells' home and watched for Biggs to return to her mother's house across the street. As Eizember testified in court, he had no knowledge of the Cantrells. Later, they were found dead in the bathroom. AJ Cantrell was beaten to death, and his wife's body was stacked on top of him with a gunshot wound to her back. According to Eizember, while beating AJ Cantrell, the elderly man was stubborn as an army mule. Why was he being so stubborn? When he heard AJ Cantrell's dying breaths, Eizember piled his wife's dead body on top of Zone. He then went to Biggs's mother's house and shot Biggs's 16-year-old son and beat the boy's grandmother. Eizember was hunted for 37 days after stealing a woman's car and fleeing 200 miles east to Arkansas. When he faked an injury, he tricked the doctor, his wife, and his son into helping him, then held him at gunpoint while driving their van 300 miles south. When he stopped for a restroom break, the doctor pulled out his pistol and shot him. Eizember then fled to Corrigan, Texas, where a store clerk described him to the police. When they got there, they found out he was wanted for murder and was arrested by the police. At trial, Mike Loeffler was the lead prosecutor. As the first assistant district attorney in Creek County, he described Eizember as highly intelligent and anti-woman. He was sober when he committed his crimes. Loeffler said he just inexplicably would do evil things. There was only one time he showed any emotion in court, when he saw his ex-girlfriend with a new guy. When Eizember had the death warrant, he turned to her and said, "You got what you wanted." Eizember was sentenced to death for killing AJ Cantrell in the first degree. He also got 150 years for killing Patsy Cantrell in the second degree. Eizember, as a 62-year-old man, was executed by lethal injection in Oklahoma on January 12, 2023, Thursday. According to the Associated Press, Eizember said, "I'm at peace," with an intravenous line in his arm. He also mentioned that he loved his children and that his conscience was clear. Eizember received his last meal on Wednesday evening, and the lethal drugs were administered at 10:01 a.m. on Thursday. He was declared dead at 10:15. During the execution, Eizember spoke with his spiritual advisor, Reverend Jeffrey Hood, who was initially barred from the death chamber by the Oklahoma Department of Corrections, but allowed in after the victim's family requested it. Eizember also lifted his head and mouthed "I love you" to his daughters and attorneys.